welcome to the Absolute Gamecast. As many of you probably already know, the massive popularity of the FNAF series has spawned many fan games, plenty of which being iconic staples to the series' history to this day, with fan bases all their own, such as Five Nights at Candy's, Five Nights at Treasure Island, and One Night at Flumpty's, to name a few. But before I cover some of the more talked about series, I'm going to cover a fan game series I don't really see many people talking about anymore that I feel is fairly underrated, that being the Five Nights at the Krusty Krab trilogy. Five Nights at the Krusty Krab and its two sequels were developed by Australian game developer Dakota Wood, or Syncaroonie. The series started all the way back in January 2015 and is still continuing to this day, with a remake of the first game on the way. The series brings SpongeBob and Five Nights at Freddy's together in a way that, while similar to other FNAF games of its time, blends together in a way that I see as being very cohesive given the stark tonal contrast between the two. Some of the character designs hit in the right place in terms of horror. I've found recently when designing characters in a horror game like this, the best approach is to make them recognizable or appealing if possible when they aren't monsters, and then distort them into more monstrous forms to make them unnatural in comparison to how they started, and many of the designs here fit very closely with that idea. Five Nights at the Krusty Krab is the first game in the series, and the first I checked out for this video. In this game, Mr. Krabs builds the new Krusty Krab 3 next to the original and the Krusty Krab 2, as well as a line of animatronics based on him and his friends and his employees, because money! And all is well until the animatronics start getting a bit quirky at night, and now you have to survive 5 to 6 nights at the Krusty Krab before it's burnt down at the end, because this is a FNAF game and something has to be set on fire at least once. The character designs look good and it's easy to tell who's who, but while appropriate, they do just look like robot versions of the characters they are and don't have too many features that make them look that scary. But I don't have any problems with that at all, since it does reasonably fit the less is more horror vibe most FNAF games have. And for that I have to give credit where it's due. The gameplay loop is pretty standard FNAF fare with 2 doors on either side with the addition of a window in front of you, which you'll have to deal with more in the later nights. There's also Sandy, who messes with your power and eventually kills you once the generator fully fails. I missed out on the first phone call due to a personal oversight, and so I struggled with learning the mechanics, and I had a few encounters where someone was at my door and refused to leave for in-game hours. The gameplay loop is a mixture of FNAF 1 and 2, with closing the doors and a window in front of you. Most of the animatronics will appear at the doors and are only visible when the lights are on. But you also have a flashlight that you need to use to deflect Squidward, who appears at the window, similar to how Withered Foxy is deflected in FNAF 2. I think out of the 3, this is probably my least favorite game of the series, but for a starting point of the series, it does its job well in the story department, so I recommend playing it, especially if you decide to marathon the series. Five Nights at the Chum Bucket was released 4 months after the first game in May 2015. Out of the gate, this is probably my favorite of the series. The story is great, the gameplay loop is solid, and the character design is really well done, with my favorite easily being Squidward. He embodies my philosophy of horror design, making it obvious that it's meant to be Squidward from the show, and yet he looks deadly and extremely deranged when you get a good look at him, especially in the air duct camera render. This is largely where my comment earlier comes into play, with most of the designs from this game fitting my philosophy to a T, and are twisted in just the right way to where they're creepy and unsettling, if admittedly a little unironically cool at the same time. The story picks up after the previous, with the player from the last game waking up inside a twisted, realistic depiction of the Chum Bucket, similar to the Krusty Krab in the previous game, and being threatened by a mysterious caller who's orchestrating this whole game and the animatronics, and the other character, who I believe is the phone guy from the first game, who's trying to rescue you. This time I don't want to spoil the ending, so if you have a chance, you should definitely check this game out. The gameplay loop follows the first game pretty closely, but makes it a lot more interesting, with the power mechanic being replaced with a 2 at a time limit on how many defenses can be used at a single time, and a limit on how long the doors can be closed for before malfunctioning. There's also a button on your desk that's used to presumably deal with Sandy, but can also help you by allowing you to use one extra defense at a time before cooling down, and an air duct, as mentioned before, that you have to seal to prevent Squidward from getting in, which if you fail to seal in time, the only thing that'll be sealed after that is your fate. At the time of writing this, I've made it to night 6, and my strategy I recommend using is to keep your eyes on the hallway cameras and the air duct and move in a circular motion between them, which allows you to monitor basically all the animatronics except one, which I've only seen sparingly without having to shuffle between all the cameras at once. Overall, I had a lot of fun with this game, and as I said earlier, I really think you should check it out. I'd also definitely recommend it as a testing ground for any new FNAF fans who want to learn the fundamentals all in one simple package, similar to UCN, seeing as this game has most mechanics you see in the bulk of FNAF games, but in a much more manageable loop. Released 7 years after the previous games, the final game in this video, Five Nights at the Krusty Krab Chapter 3, is probably my second favorite in the series. The story is pretty good, but you don't get much, with basically a cutscene at the beginning and end of the game that explains the new character Hammerhead's backstory, which I won't spoil here in case you want to play the game yourself. This cutscene also ties up the loose ends of the story while leaving more questions for you to answer for yourself. Your player is inside a US nuclear reactor facility and has to defend the core and themselves from various SpongeBob animatronics from the past, as well as some new ones. The gameplay loop is probably the most creative and interesting of the series, if a little challenging with the amount of things you have to balance all at once. But there's nothing wrong with that, and I'm sure there are plenty of people who enjoy the difficulty. During the game, you have 2 large hallways, one to the left, one to the right, as well as a drawer full of spare fuses in front of you for the fuse box behind you. You have a power system to keep track of and 3 defenses that affect it, being the hall lights, cameras, and the coolant pump for the reactor core you're tasked with safeguarding. There are also occasions when an animatronic will pop their head out of the vent on the ceiling, and when that happens, you have to turn off the lights before they attack you. There's also a button on your desk that will supercharge the reactor core to keep it from failing, but blows a fuse in the process, which you then have to replace. Overall, I can tell from the few nights I played that this is a good game, and even though it was too difficult for me to beat personally, I don't hold that against the game at all. I'm admittedly not the best at FNAF games, and I have no doubt that it's purely a skill issue on my part and no fault of the game. I definitely recommend the game, especially if you're up for the challenge. In conclusion, I enjoyed the series overall, and I look forward to playing the Krusty Krab remake when it comes out. If you'd like to, I'd appreciate if you would go support Syncaroonie on his social media for making this series, and so you can get updates on his future projects. I'll leave his Twitter and GameJolt links and his YouTube channel in the description. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and this saga. I hope it motivated you guys to check out the games and play them for yourself. If you did enjoy this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications. Not gonna force you, do what you want. Thanks for tuning in, and that's the video. Bye.